So next up, as the beautiful, glamorous volunteers work in the background, we're going to have a panel. It's something we've not had at Women Tech Makers for a little while, and I'm really excited about it. I think it's a great format. I think it's a lovely way to end the day as well with some conversation. And I think the topic in particular is really interesting. Communication is everything when it comes to this world, not to steal anyone's points. And anyone who's heard me talk on some of these things before will know that like years ago, I had a manager tell me I should go into product because I'm a good communicator. I was like, well, I have none of the other skills for that. And, you know, I actually think it's important for engineers to be good at communicating. So yeah, I'm really interested to hear from these 5 women, hear their viewpoints and how we can kind of bridge the gaps across the different groups and how they see each other. As you'll see, again, not to steal their thunder, there is a Slido. If anyone's not used that before, slido.com. You can put the code in and then you can take part, ask questions and get involved in the talk. So here we go. I'll let 5 of you come up. Do we need this mic or are we good? Okay, cool. Big round of applause for our final panel. Keep applauding, keep applauding. We're going to go smooth, go smooth, go smooth.
Hello. Hi everyone, thank you for sticking around for the end of the day. It's been a really amazing day. I've been learning so much and yeah, I'm just very excited for everything that we've learned today and what's to come now. So my name is Isabella. First and foremost, I'm Australian, so I'm really sorry about my accent. Bear with me for the next, it's only for the next 40 minutes that you're listening to the extended cut of Finding Nemo, so enjoy that. I am head of product delivery at an Australian startup, but our engineering teams are here in Belfast and in London, where I live. So, bridging the gap between technical and non-technical communication. Really interesting title, I'll own up to that. Not the best for creativity right there. But I submitted this talk today as I think it's a really hard, soft skill. I refer to this skill as a form of translation because for me it had its roots when I was learning a language. It wasn't Python, it wasn't Java, it was something much more sinister and much less forgiving, and it was French. And I found that without really realizing it, that every time I had forgotten a word or I was trying to just figure out how to communicate to the other person in the room, I was finding just different ways to explain myself and different flexibility of how to get my point across. Fast forward to now, this is such an important part of my job because I spend pretty much all my time sitting with engineers, understanding how a project is progressing and what I need to feed back to stakeholders in the business, like in marketing, ops, or to the executives in the business too. When it comes to breaking the pattern and our theme today, I think that this skill is a really key enabler for women in all walks of tech to progress. As an engineer, understanding how to communicate what's happening on your project in a way that resonates with other stakeholders in the business is a really important way to sort of show your visibility and your sort of broader understanding of what's happening in your company. And I think that's a really great way to sort of show your sort of leadership abilities there. As someone less technical, you kind of flip it on the other side and it becomes a way of how do you build your technical acumen really, really quickly. So a lot of that is asking the silly questions, staying curious, trying to get to the bottom of why we're doing what we're doing. And thankfully, those kind of 3 things there are pretty much what the whole tech industry is about, right? It's about staying curious. We are seeing outside of the workplace as well, and as we've heard today, a lot about our friend Claude and ChatGPT and AI. And we're this skill of being able to explain to our friends, to our kids, and to our families about, yeah, you're using this tool, but what is actually happening under the hood there? I think as people working in this industry, it's really important to be able to have those conversations with people who aren't in the industry as well. So without further ado, I'm going to hand to my panelists to sort of introduce themselves before we get into the questions. So Ava?
So hi everyone, I'm Ava. I'm 18 and I'm a founder and researcher, and I work at the intersection of psychology, technology, education. I started doing research whenever I was super young and through science competitions and things like that, and then that sort of just evolved into building startups and solving real world problems and stuff. So a lot of my work now sits at the space between technical systems and real people. So I translate a lot of like complex ideas into things that are actually useful in the real world and focus on building communities for young people in the NI tech ecosystem.
Hi, I'm Carolyn Pereira-Lynch. I'm originally from Canada, and I moved over to Northern Ireland 20 years ago to do a PhD in astrophysics. So yeah, trying to explain complex topics in simple ways has sort of been in my background for a while. After my PhD, I went into teaching. I was a science teacher, a physics teacher, and eventually a computer science teacher. So again, there I was, translating complex ideas to students from age 11 to age 18, and how you speak to the different audiences is an important part of that. And then 3 years ago, I decided to try going into the world of tech. I'm now a data engineer, still finding my feet, but making good progress. Sorry, there is.
Hi, I'm Lolade, like holiday, but pronounced with an L. And I am a lead program manager at Rapid7 in our exposure command pillar, kind of working in the intersection between product, design, and engineering. And I'm really excited to be part of this panel today and speaking all things technical translation with the ladies here.
Thank you, and I'm Nicole. I'm a former teacher, and I co-found a business with my wife called Did You Know This? And we wear a couple of hats there. One is going into schools, supporting them with technology and ICT, and a lot of training for teachers. And then the other part is that we contract services, mostly for Adobe. So we've done graphic design for them, and then I run the education community programs across Europe for them as well. So most of my translation is aimed at teachers and young people.
Cool. So we're going to start with Ava. So you've worked across research and startups. How do you decide what technical detail to include, what to leave out when you're pitching to or explaining your work?
So one thing that I've definitely learned is that technical detail only matters if it's going to help someone make a decision. So in research, obviously, people want to understand the methodology, and in startups, people want to understand the problem, the outcome, and the risk. So I usually try to start with 3 things: is what problem are we solving, why does it matter now, and what changes if this does work out. So once people understand that, then you can selectively add technical detail that builds trust and not confusion. That's the really important part, is you're not trying to confuse someone and sound super intelligent and give them loads of complex ideas. You're trying to explain it in terms that they understand and show them how it'll benefit them and, I suppose, their area of expertise. So, for example, I might explain the architecture or the model choice if it answers a question about how it'll impact reliability or scale. And I think the mistake people make is just trying to prove intelligence through complexity, whereas in reality it's clarity that builds credibility and helps you build trust with whoever you may be explaining this technical idea to.
Yeah, for sure. And then as a young founder, is there anything that you do to frame your work to people who might be underestimating you? For example, like investors or educators?
Yeah, so definitely being young, you get underestimated a lot. So the important thing is to focus on evidence over explanation. People want to see cold hard facts to prove that you do have a good track record. So instead of trying to convince people that I understand something, it's easier to show like experiments we've ran, the problems we've solved, and the people that are already using whatever it is that we've created. So when people see outcomes, whether it's a prototype, a pilot, or literally just data and numbers, the conversation tends to shift very, very quickly. And being young can mean that people initially do underestimate you, but it can also be an advantage because you're often a lot closer to the problem than somebody who I suppose like is higher up the food chain. So definitely I think trying to frame it as like not here's what I built, but more here's the problem that was observed and here's how we fixed it. So going through it like a process instead of just sort of at your end goal and showing, oh yes, here's what we've already finished, because I think people tend to assume, they like the term like startup founder, or they like somebody they know, like they know people who's built it for them, or they're in the right rooms. Whereas if you go through that, you actually found the problem and you went through and you found a solution and then you built the solution, they tend to trust you a lot faster and actually give you, I suppose, the credibility you deserve.
Yeah. And then what is one question that you've learned to ask that immediately improves the alignment on a project?
I think the question I ask most often is, what decision is this information supposed to help us make? Like, I suppose a lot of miscommunication happens because people are sharing information without agreeing on the decision behind it. And once you clarify the decision, everything else becomes easier. So what data matters, what level of technical detail is useful, and who actually needs to be involved in this decision. Because whenever you have too many heads to one decision, I suppose communication lines can become clouded, and that just messes things up very, very quickly. So it turns conversations from information sharing into decision making, which is where projects actually tend to move forward.
Yeah, and Nicole, did you want to weigh in on that one as well?
Yeah, I suppose whenever, like, I've been through startup pitching and things like that in the past of my former business. Haven't done any yet, although maybe I will get back into that arena. But one of the questions that I would ask most, especially when working with product developers and engineers, whenever I had to try and translate it for my less techie co-founder, we've all been like, what's the most obvious blind spot that I'm going to omit? Like, what's the really important thing that I need to communicate? Or can I practice saying this, and can you fact check me basically and correct me? That kind of way I built my confidence, but then also it meant that I wasn't passing on misinformation in my attempt to translate something.
Yeah, and Lolade, I think you had thoughts on this one too.
Yeah, I think for me, the most important questions that I would usually ask is, what are we trying to solve for, and who are we trying to solve that for, and do we have enough information to make that decision? I've been in rooms of like engineers, product managers, UX designers, and we'll go round and round in circles, asking each other questions, proposing different solutions and ways and paths that we could go down. And sometimes that can get you to a point where you almost like end up having decision paralysis. And a lot of times it's easier, and like a good input to kind of push through that is, who are we actually trying to solve this for? Like going back to the drawing board and really asking those questions and critically looking at what we're trying to do and saying, is this actually solving for, and do we know who our market is for this? Is a really good way I found to like drive alignment within cross-functional teams.
Yeah, and always asking, we've come to this solution, but what is actually underpinning, what are our assumptions on this project, and kind of bringing that back up to the fore, I think is always super helpful too. I think we'll go to Lolade now as well. So if you didn't come from an engineering background, how did you build enough technical literacy to ask good questions?
Yeah. So I did not come from an engineering background, and a non-technical background as well. I actually studied law and German in university, and before that I'd mainly been in the kind of financial services industry and legal industries before transitioning into tech. And I've more recently entered into the world of cybersecurity, and anyone in that industry knows it is a very steep and sharp learning curve, and I was kind of thrust into it very, very quickly. I was immediately running calls with multiple stakeholders and having to understand the updates that they were relaying to me, relay those to our executives, and then understand the feedback that was coming from our executives and relay it back in an effective way to my teams. And some of the tools that really helped me kind of build that acumen quickly was, firstly, building my network of people I could ask questions, like really identifying those strong technical translators within my team that were able to not really just explain the product they're working on, but how that product, the impact of that product, and how it interacts with other products within our ecosystem, and the value of those things. The other thing that I found really helpful, and I think we've alluded to it earlier as well, is just asking the right questions. I think this is important at the outset of a project, but also throughout the project. I don't need to know all of the how of what we're building, the code behind it, but I do need to understand, what is the impact? What happens if we're delayed? Do we have all the right stakeholders engaged? And asking those questions I found always really helped drive that kind of alignment, and also helped me make sure that I was getting the information I really needed to communicate effectively. I also kept a document that I colloquially called the Glossary of Confusion, which was just all of the terms that I would hear in multiple meetings that I was like, I don't know what you're saying to me. And I would take those afterwards and then do research on them, and try and build up my own understanding. There's this term in linguistics called a false cognate, which is essentially two words that look the same and sound the same but don't mean the same thing, and that is rife in cybersecurity. I'd often have to clarify, are we talking about the same thing? I know you're using that word, but am I also understanding? And I think one of the big things for me as a non-technical person as well was don't sell yourself short as well. Don't, preface everything with like, I'm not technical, I don't understand. A lot of the times you'll be in this room and everyone's as confused as you. So there's strategic ways of like really asking questions and trying to drive that understanding, maybe clarifying, are we all on the same page here? This is my understanding of what you just explained to me. Am I correct in that? Am I not correct? Where have I like deviated from what you're kind of explaining? And those things have really helped me build up that acumen quickly.
Yeah, and I think like having the sort of awareness of how I've kind of gotten to my, understanding of this and being like, please pick this apart for me. And that way I can kind of learn for like next time on how to learn something very quickly and pick it up. And then you talk about building trust as well without writing code. What behaviors do you think build credibility within engineering teams when you're not completely in the detail and in the weeds?
Bribery and blackmail. I'm just joking. I mean, for legal purposes, I'm joking about the blackmail part. Bribery, I'm not above, bribery. Sometimes a well-placed box of donuts in an all-day strategy session can really, drive engagement from your teams. But like all jokes aside, I think for me, kind of the big things that really kind of helped me, really understand, and like the questions I would ask from my team were, what do you care about? Like, what do you care about working on? What don't you care about working on? And how can I leverage my influence so you can focus more on the former and less on the latter? Which sounds really easy in theory, but when you have like executives with deadlines and different like requirements breathing down your neck, and like product teams that have different visions and alignment, it's kind of very easy to kind of go off track and not be able to like, adequately protect that time for your engineering teams. And one of the situations I actually dealt with recently was when we were going through our quarterly prioritization summit. And this was like engineering, all of our leadership kind of aligned in a room going through our like initiatives for the year and trying to rank them. And there was misalignment basically between the product team and the engineering team because they just weren't communicating in the same language. Like engineering was trying to talk about the things that they wanted to work on, the things they cared about, but it wasn't in a language that product was understanding, and then product wasn't really taking in or like understanding the like, output and the value of the things that we were trying to do. So when it came to our next planning summit, I was like, right, let's all get together, sit together as an engineering team and go through our strategy, and not within our team only, but like cross-functionally, let's align and understand, the value of what we're doing and really communicate that effectively. And I think we were effectively able to really bridge that gap whenever we were able to not just show like why we were doing stuff, but why our engineering roadmap was actually helping us like, accelerate our product roadmap and vision, and how like, building this infrastructure and investing on quality and all of these things really helps boost us, in our product vision. And I think what helped me ultimately build trust with my engineering team in that was showing them that, I'm not just bringing you together to like, yap and eat donuts. It's like I'm trying to bring you together and show a tangible outcome, which in this example was a more balanced roadmap for our upcoming quarter.
Yeah, and I think that's so relevant as well as a way to build trust. It's, I hear you, I hear that you do want to work on infrastructural projects, but they can be a really hard sell when you take it back to, an executive group or whoever's actually making the prioritization call. It's, sorry, we do need to spend like the next 3 months fixing this, and it's like, oh, this is not going to go well. And then when we're back on the sort of like translation sort of topic, so how do you know when you've translated something effectively to your stakeholders?
Yeah, no, I really love that question. Like for me personally, I have like a background in languages. I grew up in a bilingual home. All of my Yoruba girls, if you're out there, shout out. And also, grew up down south. So had to do Irish as a mandatory subject. Again, shout out to all my Gaelgors. And then decided to do, I was a bit of an anime nerd back then, so decided to do Japanese as an additional language, and then had to do another modern language, which was German, which is where the German from earlier factors in. And with all of those languages, I knew I was communicating and translating effectively whenever I was able to, have a conversation with someone in their language, sprinkle a little bit of slang here, watch a show and not like have to like pay as close attention to the subtitles. And even before all of those languages, I think one of the first languages that I really became like fluent in and adept in was code switching, which is particularly important to me as a woman of color that's navigated in a lot of predominantly white spaces, whether that's school or work or like, education. Like it has been something that I have, really like worked on. And I think the difference for me with that language versus other languages is still trying to retain my own authenticity while effectively communicating with others. And what does that mean in tech? It means I don't have to pretend I'm the best coder or even can code at all. I don't have to pretend I'm the most technical person, but I do have to make sure that I'm understanding you and you're understanding me. And how do I measure that? It's by the impact of what I'm saying. Is there actually a result coming out of our conversation? Do you change your behaviors? Does this impact our roadmap? And whenever I could see that impact, I know I was communicating effectively and really translating and having that back and forth. And I kind of bring up all these examples of like my own personal experience with languages and code switching to just kind of highlight that every single woman in this room has those skills. Like, these are soft skills that you use in your day-to-day, whether you're, navigating predominantly male spaces that haven't been built for us, interacting with your family, interacting with your friends, creepy coworker, creepy guy, it's like all of these subtle things that we do on a day-to-day basis. And I think you can really harness and hone and leverage this power to navigate the corporate tech world as well. The only thing that's really holding you back from that is how willing you are to pick up a new language.
Yeah. And for our teachers on the panel, I think you have had a lot of experience, or former teachers, but once a teacher, always a teacher, right? And so, Nicole, how do you know that you've translated something effectively in like the classrooms that you continue to be in, as well as the ones you used to teach in as well?
There's so many yes ands I want to do. Like, donuts work really well as well in staff rooms.
Shout out to O Donuts in Belfast City.
Yeah. I think for me, it's whenever the questions I get back are what ifs and how about instead of what is and, how to. Whenever I see like those higher order thinking skill questions come into me, I'm like, okay, they got this concept now. They're ready to start applying and not just, implementing and still trying to just comprehend the basic concept. So I'm always looking for the next level of questions that are coming from whether it's children or teachers.
And
Carolyn?
I think I agree a lot with getting questions back. That's usually a good sign that you've translated well. But also, I guess, body language and expressions. I think in the classroom, it's a lot easier. You get, the blank stares. If something's gone over somebody's head, it's a lot easier to pick up than on Teams. So I think managing that virtual interface between people is a big challenge sometimes when you're trying to translate. But yeah, usually trying to get some good questions back, or those higher order thinking communications back, is a good sign that you've translated well.
And so still on you, Dr. Carolyn, you have had multiple chapters in your career as an academic, a teacher, and now a data engineer. So how has all of that sort of helped you translate between highly technical engineers and everyday users, as you've also been getting up to speed in the tech world?
Yeah, I think my background, where everything started, was watching Carl Sagan Cosmos on TV back in the 80s with my dad. And somebody like that who could communicate science to the masses always stayed with me. It was something inspiring. And then later on was Stephen Hawking, and later on was Brian Cox. And all those great communicators were sort of my source of inspiration. And that's where I sort of decided that that's the kind of person I wanted to be. So when I became a teacher, then that was my bread and butter, like really trying to get students to understand physics, which a lot of students were intimidated by. Think that it's a hard subject, and it's not a hard subject once you understand it. By the way, Lisa, you did a great job with the quantum physics. It brought me back today.
Yeah, you should have a seat here.
Yeah. Where was I going with that? Sorry.
Translating between.
Yeah. So I guess those skills have been part of my different careers for the last 20 years. And now that I've transitioned into data engineering, I'm finding that it's one of my strengths, that I'm able to know based on the audience. Do I go into the more technical, like I would have with the A-levels when talking about the Big Bang Theory and talk about redshift and wavelengths and things like that? They need that minutia of detail because that's the right audience. Or do I go and talk more about the practical and the more superficial things because that's what's more interesting? So I think it's knowing your audience and knowing where the details need to go. So that those different parts of my careers have really helped strengthen those skills.
Yeah, and Nicole, with you've had a few career sort of swaps and pivots and things as well. How has that helped you?
Yeah, I call it a squiggly career, and it's directly from the squiggly career test that I took before making the commitment to back myself and leave teaching. But one of the things that's probably helped me most with is helping teachers, or when I go in and do careers talks, to explain that it's not really, school, uni, career, retire, or one career, retire. So being able to say, well, I'm an example of a portfolio careerist right now, which means I don't have all my eggs in one basket, especially in the tech world, which can be a little bit ruthless with layoffs and things like that. As like, I've got enough diversity in there, and then being able to illustrate, well, here's how I know that it's a massive source of privilege that I'm able to have a portfolio career, but being able to illustrate it to people really helps when they're looking at careers in tech, where most people don't stay in one job role the entire time because the jobs evolve and rapidly change that much. So I think it really helps me in that way, being able to like physically show an example of what a portfolio career even means, and especially for the world of tech.
Yeah. And then switching into talking a bit more about AI as well. So Carolyn, you recently built an AI study buddy for your daughter as she was entering high school. So that was based on a real world problem. How did you go about, what was your inspiration behind building this? How did you go about getting good feedback from your user who was your daughter, and explaining kind of what you were doing to potentially other parents or anyone else?
I think it sort of stemmed from lots of different things coming together. Had set myself the goal this year to try to do something with AI, to actually build something with AI, because I just saw it gaining speed more and more every day. And as I'm at the early stages of my career, I just said I better jump on this, because otherwise it's going to pass me by and I don't want to be left behind. So that was my goal. But I'm also in the early stages of becoming a data engineer, so I'm learning all the stuff, Python, SQL, CI/CD pipelines, ETL, all of that very technical stuff, upskilling very quickly. So it was challenging to try to find the time to do that. And then my daughter started secondary school this year in September. And, the teacher, I might not be a teacher anymore, but the teacher's still in me. I care about her education. I care about supporting her. And she had always been a really bright and able student who enjoyed learning, and things started getting challenging for her. So we were trying to dig in. And I think when AI came out a couple of years ago, I was like, wow, this can really, really have a really positive impact in education, because that's one of the biggest things is education is so linear, and you have, so many days to get through the syllabus. And if a student has a gap, you might not have time to go and revisit that gap with that student, because you have 30 other students in the room and times how many classes you have. And over time, those little gaps compound to each other. And then by the end of the school year, the student might not have a full understanding. And then they start telling themselves stories. I'm not that good at that subject. I'm not good at math. And it's not that they're not good at it. It's because they just have those little knowledge gaps that still exist. And AI has the potential to be that study buddy, that thing that can help fill in those gaps, because it has infinite amount of time. You can ask it at any time. It's there for you whenever you need it. So I decided to try to build something for my daughter when she was trying to revise for her Irish, and where I couldn't help her with that, and her history, which I couldn't help her with. So I was just feeding in, her study notes and things like that, and it was creating lovely quizzes for her, and she was interacting with it, and we learned about the API tokens and the context window, and the latency between it, and the pros and cons of how to build it. And I tested lots of different things, and then I guess my scientific brain was experimenting between, was it better to do it this way or this way? So she was my I guess idea buddy as well. So we built it together, and she was testing it and quite gave me a lot of good feedback. So it was a really cool project, and then I presented it at work and got some nice feedback about it too.
Amazing. Cool. And then, so when you are sort of at work, and what do you think is one mistake organizations make when they are trying to explain an AI initiative to non-technical stakeholders to get endorsement of them?
Yeah, I think if they go too technical into something, AI can be quite a scary and big topic, and there's so much terminology specific to AI. I think it's building it down to a little bit like what you were saying, Ava, was identifying what the problem is and the why, and what is the solution, and not going into all of those details about what, even I don't know all the details. I'm still at the starting point in my journey with that, but yeah.
I guess it can also be difficult sometimes if there's a lot of hype around a certain AI tool, and then you go into a meeting and they're like, we want to do this because this is what we've heard everyone is doing. It's like, well, why? Like, why do we want to do this over that? And I think that's also a mistake that can often get made. Ava, what are your thoughts on this one?
I totally agree with what you said of just like overcomplicating things instantly just completely ruins any form of credibility you have. And I think all I really have to add to that is I think just starting with the technology instead of what the problem is whenever you first enter a room is the biggest mistake you can make. I think always starting with the problem and making it seem human before you go in with a completely like high quality technological response, people are going to be like, what the hell is she talking about? So it's just far easier to start with a problem, keep it human, and then again explain the why of why you're using something or why you're doing something a specific way.
Yeah, sure. And then now to Nicole. So when tech flops inside the classroom, do you think this is usually a problem with the tech itself or a problem with how it's being translated and communicated in a classroom?
Probably a bit of both. The first problem is always access to the technology first. So depending on what school you're in, depends on if you even have access to one-to-one devices or if you're going to prioritise going to the ICT suite. You know, for post-primary school teachers, when they only have like a 40-minute period and it takes 10 minutes to get logged in and things like that, they might just go, no, it's not worth it, I'll not go along. But for the translation piece, the C of ICT being communication, I think often gets left out now. It used to be so heavily focused on back in the day, but it's still one of the real fundamentals. Even if I'm going in doing a session on an Adobe tool, the things that the teacher's comment back to me is like, oh my gosh, it's actually the stuff and how you explained what a cursor is, or how you showed like, you know, like the cursor on the screen is like your body language, you know, why is it this shape and how do you know I'm doing this, you know, things like that they get to see. I think then we have a framework for ICT in schools, 4 pillars called SAMR, so substitution, augmentation, modification and redefinition. And a lot of teachers stay in substitution, which is just replace this worksheet with a digital worksheet. And then we never get on to the redefinition of completely changing what the assessment or whatever the learning task was. And the reason they can't go from substitution to redefinition, not that it's that linear, you can go back and forth, but often the reason they can't get there is because the training they've received is the how to push buttons and, you know, how to technically work thing rather than go with the why, like why are we using this tool, like why is it going to help with learning, and why are we putting in student voice and things like that. So if you go in with just here's how to code, here's how to use Scratch, here's how to use this, teachers will learn the buttons for it, but they'll never go and completely redefine their assessment because they don't know the pedagogical reason behind it. So that's where it's really handy that I work with industry people who know all the technical parts of it, and then I bring the pedagogical lens, and we have a beautiful baby whenever we make workshops for schools.
And so a really important part in all of this is psychological safety, and you know, we call it a silly question. I always call every question I answer silly, so kind of just like, you know, over time the word silly just will mean nothing. And so when it comes to psychological safety, how does trust affect the success of how you're sort of explaining things in different stakeholder groups? And yeah.
No, it's fundamental. So I think one of the things I've experienced going into some schools is they feel like an external provider coming in is going to be a whole lot more like elevated and elite and things like that. They have like the fear of the inspectors and people like that. But I go in and I bring donuts, but bring I call it like professional realism. Like I try to be like very approachable and very accessible, and if they have questions that I don't know the answer to, I just like, let's work it out together. You know, let's find out what we know. And I think whenever I very quickly will dismiss any expert labels that schools try to throw my way and go, no, not an expert, very much a lifelong learner here. And I was like you should be as well. So I think whenever I lower the stakes, whether it's for like a senior leadership team or whether it's for a group of parents when I'm doing an assembly type of thing, I think I lower the stakes and lower the pressure that everyone feels, then they feel like they can come and ask any question. And yeah. I do exactly what I did with my primary 3s back in the day, which was I celebrate the biggest mistake of the day or the biggest silly question of the day, and be like, I think you're winning, you know, and just make it very, very approachable to do so.
Yeah, and I think like, you know, giving it the term of being a lifelong learner, like that is something that's so relevant in tech as well. And like, you know, you're always having to learn a new, you know, something new with AI or whatever new disruptive tech is coming through. It's a very important sort of label to have, I think. Mm-hmm. And then Carolyn, as well, as you've been getting up to speed on and entering into your company as well. You've been holding some talks, I hear.
Yeah, I think one of the skills that we try to develop where I work is to communicate technical stuff, and there's a lot of different communities. There's Python community and AWS community and just all these different, and it tends to be the solution architects that give the talks, people who have a lot of experience, who know what they're talking, who they're subject matter experts. And very rarely do you have an opportunity for a junior person who's just on the start of their career to feel confident to go and talk about something, because they're still learning so much that'll be relevant to the rest of the audience. So I sort of identified that gap. And so I started a community for juniors to have a safe space to give a talk on a topic that they were learning to an audience of juniors, and I had to communicate that with my close buddies at work first, and then they said, well, you should talk to so-and-so and so-and-so, and eventually ended up talking to the CTO, and they thought it was a great idea and gave me the green light for it, and it's been a wonderful thing to see how many people come to these junior-led knowledge shares, and that we can pick any topic, and it's the basics of something, but it's just building that confidence bit by bit, gaining that traction of learning how to communicate to an audience in a safe space. So I think that's been quite a proud moment for me to see how it's taken off.
Brilliant. And then, Nicole, what do you think are some of the hidden risks that emerge when technical ambition doesn't translate to a real world sort of context?
So if I apply International Women's Day to this, and kind of think like the risk that we have whenever we talk a lot about tech in schools is I know I have a computer science teacher who has a fantastic deck about like the history of jobs in digital, and every single slide was a famous man in it, and tech, we can think of so many tech bros, but we can't really think of tech gals as equivalent.
The one that springs to mind, like, she didn't look so good in the end. She was on trial, Thanos lady,
we can rattle through tech bros, so I think that's the biggest risk we have, is always the can't see it, can't be it, and I think one of the things that I love is that the next generation of young girls and women coming up are challenging that. So I know that in that particular class, when I heard about this story, 2 girls wrote to the teacher afterwards saying, here's a suggestion for next week's lesson with new women to put into it. And I think teaching and education and tech probably mirrors gender gaps and inequalities. So about 70% of the profession is female, but then when you get higher up into senior leadership positions, government positions, and like the head of faculties and things like that, it's traditionally more men, and that would be kind of mirrored in the tech world as well. So I think whenever you can call out those type of real world illustrations of how this still matters. I heard someone's, it was not an article, it was definitely a TikTok yesterday.
I saw something.
Yes, I read something. No, I didn't, it was TikTok. Somebody saying that, she couldn't believe that in 2026 she was still going to conferences and she was one of 2 women in the room. And when she said this to the guy beside her, he was like, oh, did you not hear we're not doing women anymore? But with no humour, like he genuinely meant it, like women are part of EDI, we're not doing that anymore. And it was like, okay, yeah, we still have a long way to go. So real world problems, massive risk though, because we know that women build tech for good, and women are thinking about the empowerment and the betterment of everybody in society. So that's the biggest risk whenever we're not looking at technical ambition as a career for women and for girls.
Yeah. And Ava, did you have thoughts on this one too?
Yeah, I think whenever technical ambition and real world ambition don't align, it can be like very detrimental to the process of whoever's building the tech and whoever the tech is for. Like, I suppose if I take it back, because one of the softwares I originally built was like an educational software, and the most valuable thing I was able to do was like talk to the people who were at the heart of the problem to, I suppose, align with their views, because obviously like a software developer and a teacher are going to have 2 very different views of how a system's going to work and the outcomes they want from it and what the biggest problems that could arise in said system will be. So I just think communication is the best thing you can do there, and talking to whoever is at the heart of the problem and aligning your views of how you want it to work and what you want the outcomes to be, and then being able to find a middle ground, because from a software developer point of view, it's going to be like, all of my code works perfectly, there's going to be no bugs, like it's just going to be perfect. And then from, I suppose, like the teacher point of view, or whoever was at the heart of the problem, it was like, it's going to be able to help my child learn better. It's going to be like it's going to work first try. It's going to be really easily understood. It's going to look really nice. And those are just two completely different outlooks on what you want to happen. So being able to find a middle ground and communicate what it is that's actually doable and what the problem you're trying to solve is, instead of all of these little micro problems that branch off it, is just super important.
Yeah. And Carolyn, do you have thoughts on this one too? Honesty. I think we can open up the questions now as well. There's some. Oh, hello.
Is that easier?
Oh, no, that's good. I'm stretching my back out now. It's good. Okay, so we got 5 minutes left. I'm going to go for, I'll just go from the top. How technical communication could differ between men and women. Does anyone have any thoughts on this? I can start. I think, like, as we've kind of alluded to in kind of the earlier part, is kind of potentially just diving in with the going straight for the let's look smart, let's, going straight into the technical detail on this one. And so, sorry, can we scroll back up? I needed to. Sorry. Oh, it's already answered it. So I think it's kind of just that awareness there of like making sure that there is clarity in like what is sort of being expressed, and being very aware of like who your stakeholders are and making it relevant to them.
I think in theory it shouldn't differ between men and women, but in my personal practice, and I think I'm lucky to work in an organization that has a lot of empowered women and a lot of vocal women. And I think it alluded kind of earlier to what you were talking about why women should be in tech and involved. It's like the way they speak about the issues and the product and communicate, just they're able to draw those real life world examples a lot easier. They're able to communicate like why we're doing something, the integrity behind it, the value of it, in a way that's different, I think. But some of I have great male coworkers as well, but I think there's just that extra intentionality. And then also I think in a practical sense as well, they just will dive deeper and make sure that you're really understanding and engaging as well. And I think there's things that you can take from either side of them. I don't try and be like, oh, we should be like men or try and operate, but I do think there's some elements of the be sure in yourself, be confident, don't second guess yourself. Guys don't do that. They don't say, oh, even though when you're right, qualify it by saying, oh, I might be wrong here. And I'm very guilty of that myself. But I think that's one of the differences I want to encourage for women as well, is back yourself, know that you know what you're talking about. And if you don't, pretend you do.
And yeah, just being open to, if I am wrong, so be it. I will learn. It'll be good. The tech industry can be quite neurodiverse compared to other industries. Any tips for communication between neurodiverse and neurotypical individuals?
Can I start?
Please do.
As someone who has ADHD, late diagnosed, classic women, I find for me what works really well is I own it. I absolutely own it. I go in and I'll say it quite early on, especially to principals who might be more neurotypical. And I'll say, I was like, my preference is to make things really practical and hands-on and visual. A lot of the times it's very low tech or no tech. I'll have post-its out everywhere. We'll be on flip charts. We'll be up and moving around. And then I'll always do the same as the check-in, usually once we hit the break. And I say, I've spent the first, hour doing my style and my preferred way of organising this meeting or this consultation. Is there a way that you would prefer next? And then that way it kind of includes, they might have an opportunity to say, yeah, I actually really prefer this style, or doing something like this. So I think owning it first. Also, if you have somebody in your team that is, because not everybody discloses that they have neurodiversity, especially when there's a lot of harmful rhetoric out there at the moment. But if you have somebody in your team who's quite visibly neurodiverse and they are quite proud about it, and they, everyone's neurodivergent. If you have someone who's quite who's happy enough to be the champion or to be the person that says, come talk to me if you want some coaching or some mentoring for how to prepare a pitch deck when you're going to have to communicate something. I think that's always really good. I think one of the best things to do is, if you've got ADHD, is to get ADHD coaching for that, and there'll be similar things that are available for other neurodivergencies.
Yeah, and I think like having sort of trusted co-workers around you as well, who you can sort of, if there is like a worry or a concern about, presenting in front of a larger group and that sort of thing, like it can be so valuable just to have like trusted sort of people around you to sort of like, speak to ahead of time and sort of get their thoughts on things as well. So you have like some support around you as well. Let's see. Sometimes women get non-technical answers when asking questions. How would the panel approach trying to flip this and break this pattern, as I may say?
Can I volunteer Eva to handle that one? Because you would have fantastic capacity to understand a technical answer, but I imagine if people are going to be ageist to you, they'll try to give you the non-technical answer. So how do you flip it?
I think it's important beforehand to like know your audience, know your room, and almost have an expectation that they're going to do that. And obviously if you're like early in your career, early to whatever it may be that you're doing where this situation would take place, you're not going to know that. But something I've learned is like stuffy rooms with middle-aged men are the worst places for this to happen. So be prepared for it to happen and make sure you can hold your own. If somebody does give you a non-technical answer, the next question you ask, make it 10 times more technical than whatever their answer was. And I know that might sound really, really stubborn, but it gets you further that way than just turning around and being like, actually, I already understand that. Like, I need you to like up your technical language, whatever it is. So it's easier to be able to hold your own and almost be able to flip it back on them. And again, that sounds horrible, but just being able to prove yourself, which is a horrible thing to say because women shouldn't be having to prove themselves anymore. Like, they really shouldn't be. But it is something that does still happen. It may happen less now, but it does still happen. So having the ability to do that and being able to like pre-anticipate that is obviously a very beneficial skill. Like, if I know I'm going into a room with a group of investors who are all going to be in their mid-50s, they're all going to be wearing the same coloured suit that they've worn every day for their entire lives, and I walk in and I'm going to ask them a question or they're going to ask me a question and it's going to be the most condescending thing ever. It's always good to be able to give an answer that does answer their question, but to a far higher spec than what they would have been expecting. So yeah.
Love that. Yeah, I think did you want to close out? Good. Cool. I think that's all we have time for now. I was very worried about running over time, so that's the win for the day. If you do have any further questions, you will find us, well, me definitely, at the bar. But thank you all for sticking around for this session, and thank you all for your questions as well. And yeah, yay.
That was awesome. Thank you all so much. One more time for Isabella, Eva, Caroline, Lolade, and Nicole. Thank you, folks, for wrapping us up.